Good. As we talk over these 8 sessions that we're going to have, I've talked a fair bit about diet, and because diet plays a big role with brain health, okay? So it's only one of the things. But to lighten things up a little bit tonight, I would like to tell you that it's better to eat a Kit Kat with friends than to eat broccoli all by yourself. So food has got to be a social activity, okay? And so sometimes we have to remember that we talk a lot about food, but food should be enjoyable. It should be something that we share together, and it's something that is that should be a little bit of a celebration, okay? And of course, my wife's a foodie. She loves food. She lives around food, and so I get to benefit from that all the time. The other one I want to share with you is this one. I think I told you about it last week. Protect your child's immune system. Let them play in the mud. And we found out that children who do play in the mud and who are around animals have a much healthier immune system than those who are ultra clean and ultra, polished and that sort of thing. But tonight our subject is on depression. Approximately 11% of men and 16% of women will struggle with a major depression at some time in their life. That's a large number of people. Now, depression, it decreases the quality of life. It promotes relationship difficulties. It makes one lose time with work, lose time with one's studies. It can cause chronic disease such as diabetes and heart disease, and sometimes it can be a fatal disease. It leads to suicide and the end of life. The problem is that depression is increasing in frequency in our countries, and we are struggling with understanding why it's becoming more and more prevalent. Antidepressant medications are among the top 5 best sellers in the pharmaceutical industry. Am I correct to the pharmacist who just logged in? Now, he's very brave to come, because I put down a little bit on medication, and, but I do give him business too, so. During the course of our lives, we all have down times, difficult times. I think of the loss of a person who's very close to us. I think of the loss of a job, difficulties in the workplace, feeling of failure when things haven't gone as planned. I remember an uncle of mine, and I have a very strong family history of depression on one side of the family. My great-grandfather committed suicide with depression. One of his children committed suicide. My grandmother was terrified that one of her children were going to do the same thing. And an uncle of mine sold a piece of land that he thought he had sold for too little money. He thought he had gotten too little money out of it. And he felt that he had made a big mistake. And whether that was the cause of his depression, I don't know. But that's certainly what he blamed it to. And he went downhill very, very fast. And we were all concerned that it was going to be a life-ending disorder. So sometimes there are things that just don't go well. And but that's not really depression. We all have bad times where our mood is a little bit low. That's not a disease, okay? Now, maybe I can explain that, because as we go through depression and anxiety tonight, I think it's going to be helpful to understand this. I am a little bit claustrophobic, okay? I discovered it caving in Kentucky many long years ago. And the cave that I used to go to, and we'd go there frequently and we'd do some exploring in this cave, And to get out of the cave, there was a very narrow tunnel that you had to slide on your belly like a snake to get through it to the outside. And I usually went first. I had no problem with it. One day, I let some other people go first, and I was in the middle. I had somebody in front of me and somebody behind me, and the person in front of me got stuck.
Oh.
And I thought I was going to have to break that whole mountain down. I had no idea that I was claustrophobic. Now, that claustrophobia explains some things for me in my life. When I get an airplane ticket, I always choose the aisle, okay? If I came into a meeting like this, I would sit somewhere where I could get out easily, and I would probably be near a door or something, so I wouldn't be in the middle. But it doesn't greatly influence my life, okay? So that is a trait, okay? I can get on elevators and I can be in, small rooms, and it's not very often when I panic. So the second time that the panic hit was doing a wilderness survival course in Michigan. And when you do mountain climbing and you get up to very high altitudes, you can run into problems with high altitude cerebral edema, where your brain swells and you just go crazy. And the solution for it is to go down in altitude. So you've got to get down a couple of thousand meters, a couple of thousand feet. But if you can't do that, you're on Mount Everest or you're on Mount Denali, then it's not easy. So then what you do is you get into a bag. It's called a Gamov bag, and it's like a great big sausage, and it zips shut, and you have a foot pump, and you pump up the pressure in it, and the pressure, you got to clear your ears, and the pressure increases, and it's equivalent to going down in altitude, okay? So you can stay in the Gamov bag and help your brain unswell until you can be carried down. So I said, I'm gonna try the Gamov bag. One of my friends said, you in a Gamov bag? Yeah, me in a Gamov bag. So I climbed in and they started pumping it up, and I cleared my ears, and the little plastic window that was in there started fogging up, and all of a sudden it hit again. I said, okay, I need out. I need out. I need out. I couldn't get the zipper open fast enough to get out of there. But once again, it does not disturb normal aspects of my life, so it's a trait. So anxiety can be the same thing. I could be a little bit anxious from time to time, but if anxiety destroys our life, then it becomes a disease, okay? So there are people who have slight mood disturbances. They're down a little bit, and they always don't have a lot of energy, but it doesn't disturb their life. So that's the difference between a trait and a disease, okay, when we're talking about some of these psychological things, okay? But depression, if it becomes a disease, disturbs our thoughts, it disturbs our behavior, and as I said, it can also have physical effects. So the frontal cortex is the one we talked about the other night. That's where our conscious decision making takes place. It's where our ability to reason takes place. And when a person launches into depression, this entire frontal cortex gets totally deranged. And I will frequently tell people that it will make a mountain out of a molehill. So something that's really insignificant becomes this overwhelming problem. But on the other hand, it takes mountains and turns them into molehills too. So something that should be very serious and important is just passed off as nothing. So that's where the prefrontal cortex gets a bit disturbed. So the symptoms of depression, there's certainly a feeling of despair, a feeling of indifference about life and about those who are the closest to us. Suddenly, nothing seems to have meaning, nothing seems to have joy. a constant feeling of fatigue and a lack of mental and physical energy. And when I have someone in the office who I suspect is depressed, I will ask them some questions. How is your appetite? Are you eating the way you normally would eat? And I will get one of two replies. I'm eating all the time. I can't stop eating, or no, my appetite is terrible. We get sleep disturbance. So some people sleep much, much more. Some people can't go to sleep. So it depends on the person. And I will frequently say, do you enjoy doing the things that you normally enjoy doing? And if they say no, I can't get my mind around it. I normally love to, and whatever it is, just doesn't interest me at all. We have a lack of ability to concentrate and make decisions. And some people, they who are normally good decision makers just struggle with decisions. There's certainly emotional, what I call emotional lability. Emotions just go wild, okay? The people cry easily, people laugh when they should cry, their emotions are mixed up. There's certainly thoughts of ending one's life, and that's a question that's very important to be in tune with someone who's depressed. Headaches, digestive troubles, all of these are symptoms of depression. So, go to this slide here. So it becomes a vicious circle, okay? So we have depression, you get low energy, fatigue, you can't use your coping skills, your anxiety reduces to a manageable level, your coping skills, increased guilt, hopelessness, ineffectiveness, and it just tends to be a vicious circle. A friend of mine who struggled with depression said, the best way I can describe it is to be in a long, dark tunnel and there's no light at the end. You never see the end of the tunnel, and you think you're never going to get out of it. So conventional psychiatry immediately thinks about medication with the treatment for depression. And I will admit that there is an appropriate place for medications in the treatment of depression. But it should not necessarily be the first thing that we suggest when a person is depressed. So, for example, we've shown that in mild to moderate depression, vigorous exercise is as effective in solving it as giving pills. So we need to look at other options, and we're going to come to some suggestions of things that we can do. So frequently the problem with us physicians is, so I'm not only against pharmacists, I'm against doctors too. With us physicians, we're busy, okay? So somebody comes in the room and we say, okay, I got to give the sticker that, I'm going to put on you, and I got 3 minutes to do it or 5 minutes to do it, and okay, you're depressed, well, let me get out my prescription pad and I'm going to write you a prescription for an antidepressant. And then next person in, okay? That's unfortunately what happens. And so what I recommend to patients is don't wait until it's terrible before you come in and start talking about it. Come in, let's start talking about this earlier on so that we can look at other options before it becomes an emergency. So we have a saying that says, if you only have one tool, and it's a hammer, then everything that you see will resemble a nail, okay? So if the only tool you have to treat depression are SSRIs, antidepressant medications, then yes, that's going to be your first choice, okay? So that's why we need to be looking at different things. Depression can be a symptom that can have numerous aspects for our lives, and we have to look at what the cause of our depression is in order to be able to treat it appropriately. And there are several different treatment methods for depression. So one of the things that happens is glandular and hormonal imbalances. So we need to check a person's thyroid levels. And it's interesting to note that women specifically have increased levels of depression at 3 particular times of hormonal change. Okay? Puberty, childbirth, and menopause. Okay? And as those hormones change, frequently mood is disturbed. We men don't have quite that variation in hormones usually, but certainly puberty is a time, and teenagers, 13, 14 years old, it's a particularly difficult time for depression. They are struggling at finding their identity, of relating to peers, breaking ties with parents and establishing them with friends, and it's a time of uncertainty. It's a time of questioning your physical appearance and how strong the guys are, how beautiful the girls are, and it's an easy time for depression. And it's a time that if we don't take it seriously, there are many young people who end their lives for those reasons. It needs to be taken very seriously. So one of the things that we need to do is we need to check some other blood tests. We check thyroid hormone levels. We can check for glandular and hormonal problems and see if those are an underlying cause. There are times when I can treat depression in women by giving them some estrogen replacement a whole lot more effectively than giving them an antidepressant. So it's something that we have to be aware of. So some of the other treatment modalities that we have. Remember what I told you last week? 75% of your neurotransmitters that are the chemicals in our body that regulate our mood, 75% of them are produced in our intestinal tract. And so we need to have a very good balanced diet, and we're going to come to diet in just a little bit. But diet is an important thing, and we need to first of all look at that. I have a very, very good friend who has struggled with depression for his entire life. He's been on antidepressants since he was 12 years old. And recently, he admitted to me that he had been driving down the highway and suddenly fell into what I call the abyss, okay? Just this horrid, horrid depression, and contemplated just driving his car off the road or into oncoming traffic to end his life. So he caught himself, went to the emergency department, and guess what? Yes, he immediately got a prescription for an antidepressant. But I said to him, what did you do the day before this occurred? Well, I was with my friends and we went to a party. Yep. And what did you do at the party? Well, I had a few drinks. Yep. And have you noticed that every single time you do that, you fall into the abyss and your depression gets worse? And I went back through several episodes and he said, you're right. So he made a decision at that point in time that alcohol was no longer going to be a part of his life, and we have not had another fall into the abyss, okay? Not had another one. So there's an incidence where we discovered the cause and we are currently decreasing antidepressants. I've been on a decreasing program for a year right now, and by the end of July, he will be off antidepressants for the first time in 25 years. So we're making progress. So physical exercise, very important. And the reason why physical exercise is important is because there are two things that our brain needs in order to function well. Oxygen and glucose, okay? Two things. And they are all transmitted by the blood circulating. And we need to have blood going to our brain. We cut off the blood supply to the brain, death occurs in 8 minutes, okay? The brain has no capacity to store oxygen. you know, if I cut off the circulation to my leg, I got a couple of hours before the muscles are going to start dying. But you cut off the blood supply to the brain and death occurs very, very quickly. So we need exercise to get blood circulating and oxygenated blood circulating into the brain. Now, the interesting thing about glucose is that the brain is the only part of the body that does not require insulin to get blood sugar from the bloodstream into the cell. Normally, insulin is a pump that pumps the sugar from the bloodstream into the cell. But if that was the case, then diabetics would die very quickly without the insulin. And a type 1 diabetic would have no hope of surviving. So the brain does not require insulin to get the blood in, to get sugar in there. But cells do not tolerate high levels of blood sugar. Cells are poisoned by high levels of blood sugar. So if the blood sugar rises, the rest of the body shuts off the insulin pump so that the sugar does not get into the cell. But the brain cannot do that. And so if we have high levels of blood sugars, our brain cells are getting poisoned. And we're going to talk more about that tomorrow when we talk about dementia, because dementia is now being called type 3 diabetes. And there's a reason for it. So physical exercise, sometimes taking some mineral supplements or making sure we're getting adequate amounts of minerals is helpful as well. And one of the things that we'll talk about in a little bit will be selenium. And selenium is a trace mineral. We don't need a lot of it, but we do need some. And the best source of selenium are Brazil nuts. 1 or 2 Brazil nuts will give you all the selenium that you need. And seafood is another source. We need to increase our use of extra virgin olive oil, avocados, and nuts, which are extremely healthy fats. And a friend of mine once said that the whole purpose of food is to be a carrier for olive oil. He said we should be using extra virgin olive oil very, very liberally. And if you go to olive country in Italy and Spain and Portugal, you will see that the Italians, the Spanish, and the Portuguese use it very, very liberally. My brother-in-law went to school in Spain as a teenager, and he had very bad acne. And he thought, oh, when he saw the food was all soaked in olive oil, he thought, oh, my acne is going to be terrible. Wonder of wonders, in 2 weeks it was completely gone. So when we were last time in Portugal, my daughter was with us, and she was struggling with complexion issues. And so my wife said, why don't you just, instead of using moisturizing lotions, just use olive oil on your skin. And it was amazing. If you want a good skin softener and a good skin cream, just use some good quality olive oil. It works amazingly. And she was just amazed. We need to specifically look at organic foods, okay? And we will come to that here in a little bit, because many of the GMO'd foods, the ones that have been sprayed with Roundup, are just really poisonous. And we need to be doing the best we can to raise our own food, where we're not putting a bunch of fertilizers on. And I will have to ask some of my Amish friends here, are you guys using fertilizers with your crops? To some degree?
Mostly manures.
Mostly manures, okay, mostly natural ones, good, because that's by far the most healthy one. The chemicals that we use in fertilizers frequently are somewhat problem causing, okay? So organic foods and are good. We need to decrease our use of processed foods, which we talked about before. We make sure that we have enough vitamin B1, which is thiamine. And thiamine is found in whole grains, But when we refine the grains, we take off the bran, we take out the germ in the grain, and the B1 is found in the germ, the wheat germ, or the germ of the seed, the grain. And so frequently as we refine grains to make flour and to make stuff, we take out all the nutritious part of the grain and we just leave the starch. So we got to make sure we have enough vitamin B1. And there are people for whom I have been able to treat depression by just replacing B1. I mentioned selenium. Rule out other deficiencies, vitamin D deficiency. Those of us who live in the northern climates struggle with vitamin D levels because we've got enough winter time, we're not out in the sun. We don't get vitamin D from our food unless it's been added, and so we need to get it from sun exposure to our skin. And then we with our fear of getting sunburn and skin cancers, we want to put sunblocks on, which stops the absorption of vitamin D, and we'd be better off to increase our intake of vitamin A and retinol, which then prevents us from burning skin and prevents the cancer, okay? So I have found that by increasing my vitamin A, and I've burned enough times that I peeled skin that I can make shoes out of it, okay? Because my complexion is just burns easily. But since I've increased my vitamin A, I don't burn at all as fast, okay? Significantly less. So 15% of our population is, and I'm reading off my next slide, so I should move on over to it, and then I'll come back to the last one. 15% of the population is gluten sensitive. Another 15% are dairy sensitive. Some are soy sensitive. So I think food sensitivities can play a role, especially gluten sensitivity. And for people who are sensitive to gluten, I sometimes advise that they use sourdough bread because that digests out a fair portion of the gluten. But when you do it, you got to look at the label because much that's called sourdough bread is not really sourdough. It has yeast added to it too. So you need to look, and the only thing that's in there is the cultured sourdough starter. There's no yeast. If you do that, it digests out some of the gluten. And gluten sensitivity certainly plays a role with depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, migraines, and convulsions. It's a big issue. Okay, I'm going to go back to this one. So we can change one diet, physical exercises. Sometimes we can get what's called a SAD light, and SAD means seasonal affective disorder. So patients will come in and they'll say, every fall I get depressed. I say, oh, okay. Are you depressed in the summertime? No, I'm not depressed in the summertime. It's fall and winter that I can barely get out of bed. And so those people, I recommend that they get this special light called a SAD light, and you have to sit under it for about 30 minutes a day, but you've got to have your eyes open when you're sitting under it, okay? Because it is absorbed through your eyes. It's a certain frequency of light that's absorbed through your eyes that helps your mood improve. So if people find that their depression is worse in the winter, worse during the times when it's dark early and it doesn't get light until late, we consider seasonal affective disorder, and then the treatment for that is a SAD light. The research, which I'll share with you right now, which just came out this week, is that sleep, when we are in deep sleep, which is called level 4, level 3, non-REM sleep, and REM means rapid eye movement, that's when we dream while we're sleeping, but the deepest sleep zone that we have, it is basically what allows our brains to clean themselves. It's the toileting of the brain. So when we are in that deep sleep, the fluid that surrounds our brain and that is in the brain, and there's a whole circulation of fluid in the brain, it cleans out all the waste products, it cleans out all the damaged cells, it cleans out everything that needs to be cleaned out. It flushes the brain. And so if people are not sleeping deeply, or not sleeping enough, then they are going to struggle with some mental illness issues. And so tomorrow we're going to be talking about dementia. They did an experiment. They took a group of young men and they let them sleep only for 6 hours a night. And they found, we talked about epigenetics last week, they found that sleeping for only 6 hours a night up-regulated genes and down-regulated genes. The genes that were up-regulated are the ones that allowed cancers to develop. The ones that were down-regulated were ones that allowed dementia to develop. So they are now saying that if you sleep less than 7.5 hours a night, and I'll tell you why we picked that number, that you increase your risk of dementia multiple times fold. We're going to talk about that more tomorrow. So I sent this piece of research to my two daughters, and I told you they both work in alternative medicine. And my youngest daughter wrote back and she says, of course, Winston Churchill and Margaret Thatcher both said they never needed sleep at all. Yeah. And what happened to both of them? Dementia in their 50s. Yeah. So this whole sleep issue is very important. Now, how do we tell whether we're sleeping? What our quality of sleep is. That's the problem. When you go to a sleep lab and it's very complicated and you got to have wires all put on and measured out. My wife has a ring called an Aura ring, which is a fairly good monitor, and it will tell her how much REM sleep and how much deep sleep she's gotten. Costs about $200 or $300, and you got to pay a certain subscription per month for the computer programming to work. But I told her, I said, well, I'm going to have to use your ring one night and just see what happens. She says, it won't do you any good because it's already programmed for a 75-year-old woman. It won't give you much information. But we'll have to try it out. But the reason for 7.5 hours is normally sleep cycles take about an hour and a half. They take 90 minutes. So we go through multiple sleep cycles of 90 minutes each. And so with their studies, they've showed that probably we need about 7.5 hours of sleep a night. Not too much, not too much more, not too much less, but around 7.5 hours. So increasing sleep and quality of sleep is very important. I see a lot of people today with sleep apnea, okay? Obstructive sleep apnea. That means they stop breathing while they sleep. Frequently they're snorers, but not everybody. One of my nurses came in and said to me, I want you to check my husband for sleep apnea. I said, yeah, sure, I'll be glad to. 2 days later, he came in and he said, I want you to check her for sleep apnea. I said, okay, so I checked her, and it turned out he was perfectly fine. She was the one with the sleep apnea, and he said, that machine you gave her has given both of us a great night's sleep. So sleep apnea is another thing that decreases the quality of our sleep, and it also increases depression. I mentioned about medication is possible and is needed from time to time. Good communication with family and friends, a good supportive social circle is just very important. And it can't be overemphasized. Loneliness is epidemic in the world today. People may be more connected with internets and everything, but they're just very, very lonely. They're not really connected with people. Increased time with significant people in one's life. And I can't help by saying detox from cannabis. I think the main advertisement on MPBN is excellent. That cannabis may be legal, but it's not safe is an excellent advertisement. Cannabis today is the most important cause of mental illness in young people in the state. I'm just amazed at the numbers who come in with schizophrenia and serious depression, and invariably when I quiz them on cannabis use, it's just a major, major issue. The younger you start using cannabis, the more severe the mental illness becomes.
What is that?
Cannabis, marijuana.
Oh,
Marijuana. So, and the reason I say cannabis rather than marijuana is the stuff that you smoke, but right now cannabis is put in gummy candies and chocolate bars and brownies, and it's put in a lot of different stuff. It can be vaped, it can be smoked, it can be eaten, it can be cooked in, you can put it on your skin, absorbed through your skin. So you go into a cannabis store and there are multiple options of getting cannabis into your system. And we've made it legal in Canada, you've got it legal in Maine, and but it doesn't make it safe. Just like alcohol, it's legal, but it's not safe.
Cigarettes was that way too.
Pardon?
Cigarettes was that way too.
Oh, cigarettes are the same way. They're legal, you can sell them, but they're not safe. Yeah, exactly. And then we can do sometimes cognitive therapy, which is helping people develop better thinking habits, which also contributes to the well-being with that. But, you know, let's look at our food, okay? Let's start with food. The variety of food that's available is amazing, okay? And I talked to you last week about 40 different plant-based foods in a week. Did you count it this week, anybody?
Yes.
How many did you get?
I got 39.
39, good show, excellent.
I was so close.
Anybody else count?
Halfway.
Halfway, okay, you got started with
I
it
eat so
at
much
least.
of it anyway, I live on it, so.
Yeah, so the variety of plant-based foods, we need to get 40 different plant-based foods. And look at the variety here of foods that are available. Tonight, I just got a message. My sister has horrible eating habits, just horrid eating habits. And you can't discuss them, you can't talk about them, and she just gets angry about it. And her husband is a foodie, and my wife are foodies, and they cook tremendously well together. She doesn't eat anything. And so today, a young lady who's living with us, who is from Congo, is staying with my sister. And I told her, I said, well, when you're staying here, you're the food preparer here. And so she went down to an African store in Moncton, and she bought some African foods, and she cooked them up, and sent me a picture of them. And I said, did Cindy eat them? She said, yes, she did. We are all amazed. So nobody can believe that she actually ate them. No, eat a wide variety, and they should be different colors, because every single color in the food has a different micronutrient in it. And so these micronutrients are what keep us healthy. So they need to be eating from the rainbow, and remember I said that doesn't mean M&Ms or Skittles, yeah. It's gotta be the foods that have rich colors. So the foods rich in selenium, there they are, right there. The Brazil nuts, the broccoli, eggs, pumpkin seeds, apples, onions, yeah. There's quite a few foods that are rich in selenium. And so we have, what do we call super brain food? Avocados, blueberries, broccoli, spinach, bananas, almonds, Brussels sprouts. All very good brain foods. And of course we need a nice collection of nuts as well. And we get a nice collection of seeds and grains. We have herbs that can be used, and a whole variety of herbs. We've got a whole variety of spices. And remember that the whole purpose of food is to eat olive oil. So these are some of the things that we can do to help with depression. We need to remember that the human body was created with an ability to heal itself, okay? We were not created to be deficient in aspirin or Tylenol. We were created to be able to take care of our own things. And as I was driving down the road today, I saw some deer on the side of the road, and they look so good. They're out eating now, and their snow's gone, and I looked at how healthy they looked, and I realized they don't take medications and they're constantly I'm sure there's some of them that are sick, but they have an ability to heal themselves. And so we need to remember that sometimes all we need to do is allow our bodies to heal themselves. One thing that's very important is omega-3 fatty acids. Now, we have two types of essential fatty acids, omega-3s, omega-6s, and somewhat omega-9s. Omega-6s are found in seeds. They're found in grains. Omega-3s are found in the stalks and leaves of the plants. Okay? So, what are we doing with feeding our cows now? Are we letting them feed them out in the pasture? No, they're in a feedlot.
Right.
And what are we feeding them?
Corn.
Grains, corn and soy. What are they rich in? Omega-6s
And GMO.
and GMOs. What do we feed our
Farm.
fish that are farmed? We feed them the same things, grains. They now become rich in omega-6s and not in omega-3s. So we are all very deficient in omega-3 fatty acids. And of all the supplements that we can possibly take, probably omega-3s are the most important. Now, we can get some of these from, say, flaxseed, but that has to be processed 2 or 3 times to get into an omega-3. But here are some of the foods that will be helpful for omega-3s. We have algal oil, and incidentally for calcium replacement, the pills that you buy in the pharmacy most of the time come from ground up seashells and don't even work. So in order to get a good quality calcium for ladies with osteoporosis, we should get something from a plant-based source. And so I recommend it comes from algae. There's a type called AlgaCal, which is much better. We have our nuts, walnuts. Fish should be wild fish, not farm fish. Tuna, the problem with tuna is that the tuna is a predator fish. It's the top of the food chain in the sea. And so it eats all sorts of other fish. And with the amount of mercury that we have in the sea, it's concentrated in the tuna. And tuna is actually mercury toxic. And so if people eat tuna, it should be limited amounts, rarely, but it cannot be eaten all the time. And women who are pregnant probably should not eat tuna because of the mercury component in it. Eggs have some omega-3s in them, Brussels sprouts, and there's the amount of grams of it in the in those various omega-3s. I put every single person who comes in with depression on omega-3s and vitamin B supplementation. Preferably not in a pill form, preferably in a natural source, a food source for them. Or if it is, it's an organic, well-prepared vitamin. But omega-3s and vitamin B are just very important for brain health. So, suggestions for managing depression: a whole food diet. Get our 40 plant-based foods in every week. It gets the bacteria in our gut to growing. They produce the neurotransmitters which stabilize the brain. That's number one. Number two, keep that blood circulating, okay? Get out and exercise. I keep telling patients, if you don't move for long enough, we call the funeral home, okay? So you gotta get out, keep moving, working, exercising, crucial to good health, crucial to brain health. Avoid those as much as you possibly can, okay? It's the 90% rule. Birthdays come and you want to have a treat, and okay. But let's not eat a multicolored diet made up of those foods, okay? Another thing that's very important is resistance training. Now, resistance training is where we strain our muscles against another force, weightlifting, doing some push-ups, some sit-ups, some things that help build our muscles. And resistance training is a part of exercise as well. So we have aerobic exercise and resistance training exercise, 2 different types. Let's remember, we need that sleep, okay? So our 7.5 hours and preferably a good quality sleep. And if we're snoring and having sleep apnea, maybe we need a CPAP machine to keep us from letting our blood oxygen level decrease. So for those of you who don't understand sleep apnea, what we do is we monitor your oxygen level while you're sleeping, and for some people, the oxygen level, normally we run about, if I was to check my oxygen right now, I'd be 97, 98% oxygenation. But with people who stop breathing at night, it drops into the 80s and 70%. It's very, very low. Their brain is not getting the oxygen it needs. And remember, brains need glucose and oxygen in order to function, okay? So another thing that we can do is some relaxation techniques. We need to have time to just be quiet, time to just contemplate, time to read, time to meditate, time to pray, time to just take it easy. This is an area which I have to fight myself for because life gets busy, but it's a very, very important part. And when I do relaxation exercises, it's amazing how fast I can lower my blood pressure, lower my pulse, lower all the parameters. It's just amazing how fast it can take place. Another big issue is limit your screen time. We spend too much time looking at screens, okay? We're doing it right now even, but we spend too much. So let's limit our screen time. And then one other thing that I put in there is stomp out the ants, okay? Now, do you know what ants are? Automatic negative thoughts, okay? And that is, it frequently comes with a few words, like always and never, okay? I always do that, okay? Or I never can manage to do that. They're thoughts about just all sorts of negative things. I can't do that. Why do they, we have those and they come and they grow in our minds. And so with this friend of mine who started with depression at age 11, 12 years of age, I encourage him every single day, stomp out the ants, okay? Fight the ants today. So when you start thinking about negative thoughts, well, I'm ugly, I'm too fat, I can't do this, I'm, too stupid to do this, I never can get this done, don't get going on that. And so what we do is we replace those thoughts with positive affirmations, okay? Things that we can count on that we know for sure. And we just replace them. It's also very important to replace these negative thoughts with gratitude. Gratitude changes everything. It actually changes the quality of food that we eat. It changes the quality of our whole thinking processes. So we start with the negative thoughts. We got to think, I have been so blessed with, okay? What are they? I have a wonderful family. I am very pleased. I have very good friends. I'm pleased with, and we think about these things that we can be grateful for, and it does an amazing job at changing the chemistry in our brain. One other thing is do something for somebody else. Now we've talked a little bit, and we're going to move into our sort of social spiritual section here in just a minute, but we've talked about how the prefrontal cortex is very self-preserving, the amygdala is very self-preserving. It's where fear is located, and it's self-centered. It's wanting things for ourselves, where the prefrontal cortex is more concerned about somebody else. So as we work at helping somebody else, we do something, it makes us feel better ourselves. I'll tell you a little story from 2 days ago. My brother-in-law got on a plane on Wednesday morning and flew from Halifax through Toronto to Edmonton. And when he was boarding the plane in Toronto, there was a man there who had just had a knee replacement, and he was really struggling with his knee replacement. It wasn't bending well, and he had a window seat, and he was having a time getting in for the window seat. So my brother-in-law said, look, let me work this out. So he talked to somebody, said, would you mind changing with this man? He's really struggling. Would you mind sitting in the window and letting him have the aisle? And he got it worked out. And then as he was doing that, a lady came in who was very disabled. And so he helped her get to her seat and settled her into her seat. And so when the plane was completely loaded, the flight attendants came up to him and handed him a bag of little goodies and gifts.
Oh.
They said, we want you to know that you have decreased our workload by 90% in the boarding process on this flight. We've watched you. You helped all these people, and we just want to offer you this bag of little things as a token of our appreciation. And he looked at them and he said, you know what? Tomorrow's my birthday, and I will just accept this as a birthday gift. At which time, the head flight attendant got on the microphone and said, this is his birthday, let's everybody sing happy birthday, and the whole plane sang happy birthday to him. Well, I'll tell you what, just hearing that story makes me feel good. Okay? And I'm so proud of Dave, because he really did what we all should be doing, you know? And I've just, so often this week, I've just noticed that in the healthcare system, we're lacking compassion.
Yeah.
There's so little compassion in this world. And I just, why can't healthcare people be compassionate to somebody else? You know, so as we do this, so this story that happened on Wednesday night, or Wednesday afternoon, has just, it's been multiplied many, many times, because it's a good story of somebody helping someone else. So we need to help someone else as much as we possibly can. Our social supports are just very important. And so we need to keep our social supports. Okay, so I've spent too much time on depression. Let's go to a little bit to anxiety. And I put in a little quotation here from a Roman senator who said, the pain of the soul weighs more than the suffering of the body. And there's so much truth to that. The pain of the soul weighs more than the suffering of the body. So we have anxiety. Anxiety is a reaction that we have to something that frightens us, something that we would like to avoid. It can be an intense emotion, something we're afraid of. It can be a natural mechanism to help us survive, but unlike other psychological mechanisms, we all have anxiety from the moment we're born. But anxiety we have is a trait, not necessarily a disease. We all get anxious when we're doing something we've never done before, when we're in a new situation. A lady came in this week and she said, it was her second time in the office. She said, well, you know, the first time I was in, I forgot to tell you this, and this. And I said, well, of course you did. It was the first time we'd ever met. You didn't know me, I didn't know you. You were a little bit concerned, and so, yeah, you forgot. But now it's time to tell me. So she opened up and told me a whole lot more. She was anxious the first time she came in. Not a disease. It was a new situation, meeting a new physician, trying to give her story to them. So we all have somewhat anxiety. But sometimes this anxiety gets the best of people, and it starts controlling them. And so how we manage anxiety is very, very important. And I think I told you last week that if we treat acute pain when it first occurs, we stop chronic pain from developing. If we treat an acute trauma that somebody's had right away, we can stop it from turning into PTSD. If somebody's anxious about something and we help them work through it right away, then it does not turn into an anxiety disorder. And one of the things we tried to teach our children was happiness comes from the inside, not the outside. No matter what happens to you, you can choose to be happy. And I took my 12, 13-year-old daughter to Albania with me, where I was doing some work in Albania. And she saw how the people there were living, and there was another teenage girl who was translating for me, and the two of them became friends. And she said, "Oh, my life has been so easy compared to this girl's life, and she's happy all the time." And I said, that's the principle that I was trying to teach you. Happiness does not come from our circumstances, it comes from a choice on the inside. So when she came back and was in high school, she gave a lecture about happiness comes from the inside, not the outside. And one of her teachers came up to her and said, "Oh, this morning my car broke down, I was on the freeway, I couldn't get in, I had a flat tire, I did this, I did that, I was late leaving the house to begin with, and I don't feel well, and I'm sick, and she said, just horrible." And she said, "And then I listened to your talk, and I realized, you're right. Happiness doesn't come from the outside, it comes from the inside." She said, "I want you to know, I choose to be happy."
Amen.
So that's what we need. So we need to work with these generalized anxiety disorders. So anxiety, excessive worry, fatigue, restlessness, increased muscle tension. Do you know how many people I see? And I bet if I went around this room, I would find 65% of you with very tight muscles in your upper neck and back,
Yes.
okay? Virtually guaranteed. We all carry it there. And so, yeah, you just got to relax those muscles in our shoulders and work with it. So, impaired concentration, we're anxious, we get preoccupied, irritability, difficulty sleeping. So, if we don't resolve the anxiety, we get all sorts of problems that develop up. We have heart disease, we have weaker respiratory systems, overworked nervous systems, problem sleeping, brain starts changing because we learned about neuroplasticity last week. Our immune system is weakened, it changes our digestive system, and it affects every single aspect of our body. So we have to learn how to deal with the anxiety that is the normal part of life. 7 underlying causes. We have our gut infections and imbalances again, because that's where much of our brain health comes from. Thyroid dysfunction, Hashimoto's is an inflammation of the thyroid gland, and so you get thyroid hormone dysfunction. Adrenal fatigue, our adrenal glands stop secreting, and then we have no energy whatsoever. And autoimmune disorders, cardiovascular disease, mold poisoning, another thing, exposure to molds, another underlying cause of anxiety. So what do we do if we get anxious? Well, there are many things we can do. The first thing I recommend is that we concentrate on our breathing. Get anxious, we slow our breathing down, we focus on slow breath in, hold it, and let our breath out. And inspiration for 3 seconds, pause for 2 seconds, expiration for 5 seconds, and then a pause for 2 seconds. And if we went around and I got you to practice that this evening for 2 or 3 minutes, you would all find that your anxiety levels started to fall immediately. So we control our respirations. Muscular relaxation. So I frequently tell people, and maybe what we'll do tomorrow when we get a break is I'll get you to practice a couple of these little things. We work at working with muscles in order. So we start with the neck, and you relax your neck muscles while you're doing this slow, deep breathing. And then you relax your shoulder, left arm, right arm. Just relax those. Relax your fingers. And gradually you work through the body at just relaxing all these muscles. And that will help calm the nervous system down and anxiety down. Mindfulness. So do we all understand mindfulness? Mindfulness is just focusing on something. And I frequently will tell people, if you have a Christian background, focus on a Bible text, okay? Or I will frequently focus on a positive trait. Say I'll take peace of mind, and we just focus our mind on peace and peacefulness. And sometimes when I do the breathing exercises, I will say relaxation in, tension out. Calmness in, conflict out. Okay? Love in, hatred out. Okay? And so we focus on inhaling the positive and exhaling the negative. Dare to laugh. When I was sitting at a conference in Boston, and one evening we had about 10 of us around the table, and we're waiting for the seminar to start, and we were asking everybody what they did. And there was a lady there. She says, "Oh, I do laughter therapy." And we said, "Laughter therapy? Oh, okay. How does that work?" She said, "Well, would you like to try it?" We said, "Sure." So she got us to laugh, and I'll get you guys to do the thing in just a minute. And there was a man that was sitting there who was probably 70 years of age. He was a psychiatrist, and he was bound and determined he was not going to laugh. And there were 20 tables in the room, all with about 10 people around them. And before long, it was not only our table that was laughing, but all the other tables who didn't have a clue what was going on, they were all laughing too. But Mr. Sourpuss just could not. He just tried so hard not to laugh. And all of a sudden, we saw the corner of his mouth start to wiggle. And I'll tell you what, we just lost it with laughter. And it was so funny. So the way laughter therapy goes, and I'll get you to do it with me. We just got to start laughing, okay? So I want you to do it right now, okay? What's happened? What's happened? It's contagious.
Relaxes you, Mary.
And you relax. You feel the relaxation. So imagine doing that for 5 minutes, you know?
Imagine getting your job, getting paid.
Yeah, to do that, to help people to laugh, you know? So laughter therapy, music therapy, art therapy, all things that can help bring that tension, that anxiety down, okay? And so these are things that we need to do, and they're things that we can help others learn to do when they're very, very anxious, okay? So anxiety and depression, two very, very common mental health issues, and we can really treat them without Valium and all the other benzodiazepines and some other things, okay? And sometimes they're necessary, I agree. Okay, any questions about what we talked about, depression and anxiety, before we move on to part 2? Yeah.
Would hymn singing have a similar effect to laughing?
It could, yes, especially if it comes with a positive connection to it. There could be people who would find it very distressing, but if you have a positive connection, we have found that with Alzheimer's patients, if we go into a manor and we start playing music that was familiar from their particular age group, okay, so may pick music from the 30s or 40s or or 50s or something, and the response, the change in behavior of these dementia patients will be tremendous. So music that we assimilate, and you hear a song on the radio and you remember a very specific time in your life and where you were. I remember I had a brand new Ford Bronco when I lived in Kentucky, and I had a cassette in there of the group Bread. And whenever I hear one of those Bread songs go, I am right back in Kentucky in 1970s, and it's just amazing how it takes you back in time. And there are other songs the same way.
I would add dancing
Sure.
to that.
Oh,
because
absolutely.
It's rhythmic and it's another way of self-stumming,
It is.
and it also engages the hippocampus and the amygdala.
It does exactly right, and thank you for that suggestion. It is probably one of the most
Exercising,
top
breathing, and-
exercising. It's the coordination of it, it's the exercise, it's the breathing, it's excellent,
It
yes.
removes you, yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so any other questions before I move on? The part two is I'm talking about the battle between love and fear again, and this is an important subject. Because these two different areas of the brain that are fighting for control. We have the one area, the amygdala, which is where fear is located. We've got the prefrontal cortex where love is focused. And I want to preamble this by saying that even if someone is not religious, this still plays a very big role, okay? And tomorrow we're going to be talking again about the difference between love and fear, and we're going to be looking how sometimes religion is the source of fear, and it can be very devastating, okay? So we've got to look at why, and there's some good examples that I'll use tomorrow. So we got the battle between love and fear. Now, in the Christian scriptures, we have two descriptions that are very frequently used. We have the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of this earth, okay? And these are basically just religious descriptions of these two systems, okay? Two systems that function. And tomorrow morning, I'm going to talk about the two operating systems, okay, and how they work. But the kingdom of heaven is the one that's managed by our prefrontal cortex, which is love, care for others, graciousness, kindness. My story about my brother-in-law on the plane is a prime example, okay? What he did was not a religious act, but it was a manifestation of the principles of this kingdom of heaven component that we talk about in Scripture. The amygdala, way back at that fear center, is where the kingdom of the earth is located. So in Scripture, we have what's called the fruit of the Spirit, and these are the ones that we need to be focusing on: patience, kindness, joy, love, faithfulness, peace, goodness, self-control. All of those are these positive factors. We have a very good example in Scripture of the Good Samaritan, okay? Here we have some very religious people who don't understand these principles, and what happens? This guy is injured, he's on his way from Jerusalem to Jericho, he's beat up by robbers, he's lying on the side of the road and he's dead, and along comes a priest who has just finished serving in the temple in Jerusalem, and he will be contaminated if his shadow touches a dead person. So he very carefully moves his donkey on the other side of the road to make sure that he bypasses this poor guy lying in the ditch. Okay? Very religious, but afraid of contaminating himself. And so he passes by. And so when Jesus tells this story, he brings out the person who comes to help, and he chooses the most reviled, hated type of person there was for these people, a Samaritan. If a Samaritan touched anything, you couldn't eat it. If a Samaritan's shadow touched it, it was contaminated and you couldn't eat it. And they were just the absolute bottom of the sociological hierarchy at that point in time. And so when he tells the story of this reviled person who comes and shows mercy and compassion on somebody who's injured. And that capacity of showing compassion, caring for someone in dire circumstances, comes from that prefrontal cortex. That is where it comes from. And that was the entire message that Jesus tried to teach. when he was here. And I think of Mahatma Gandhi, who was a Hindu, and yet he exemplified so many of these characteristics. And he looked and he used to say, you know, I like Jesus, but it's Christians that I can't stand, okay? Because so few Christians are willing to show that capacity, that caring, loving, compassionate capacity. So Jesus gave a text and says, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So being served is self-focused. Where does that locate in the brain? The amygdala. Serving others, other-focused. Where does that function? Prefrontal cortex.
And the hippocampus.
And the hippocampus, yes. Two areas that fight for control in our minds and in our bodies. And it's either one or the other that will be in control. We discussed it before. So the prefrontal cortex, love, trust, altruism, peace, freedom, service for others, especially the most vulnerable, the forgotten of our society. Those are the actions that are this prefrontal cortex. The amygdala is dominant. It's self-centeredness, fear, love of self, control of others, and survival of oneself that directs our actions. Two very different things. And as I told you the other evening, I think this is basically the essence of what Christianity is all about. A couple of other, another text. So we have the fruit of the Spirit produces love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, humility, and self-control, all prefrontal cortex. In contrast, the kingdom of this earth, it's described in Romans 1:29 to 31, they are filled with all kinds of wickedness, evil, greed, vice, jealousy, murder, fighting, deceit, and malice. They gossip, they speak evil of one another, they're hateful to God, insolent, proud, boastful. They think of more ways to do evil. They disobey their parents. They have no conscience. They don't keep their promises. They show no kindness or pity for others. They know that God's laws say that people that live in this way deserve death, but they not only do them, but they approve of others who do them. So you got this two contrasts of ways of living and two centers of control. And we have a choice as to which one we're going to strengthen or which one we're going to starve. And when we talked about neuroplasticity last weekend, the brain fertilizes with BNDF this areas that are used. So if we focus on these acts of service for others with compassion, care, and love, and gratefulness, those areas of the brain grow and are strengthened and develop. And we become genuinely caring, loving people. But if we focus on that other area, the amygdala grows and gets control, and we become nasty and hateful and controlling and miserable and unhappy too. And that pattern leads to death. It leads to total destruction. It destroys our society. It destroys us. So these two centers of control, we have to decide which one we're going to strengthen. So I say often religion is the source of oppression, control, greed, and selfishness. I think of ISIS, okay? Very religious, but cruel and hateful in the highest degree. I sat down one day, we were watching Super Bowl with some friends, and this elderly couple, their daughter and son-in-law were there. And at halftime, we used to have a little meal and get together with Super Bowl time, and there was some discussion, and I mentioned to the family that we were on our way to Egypt and we were going to be working in Egypt. Well, he started asking some questions about Egypt, and so I gave him a description of Egypt and told him about, the 90% of Egypt is Muslim and 10% is Coptic Christian, and that he said, "Aren't you afraid to go?" I said, no, we get along fairly well. And I said, one day I was in Jordan and a man came up to me and he says, "Are you a Christian?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, I'm a Muslim. Muslims, Christians, brothers." I said, "Absolutely." Oh, son-in-law got furiously angry with me. He started, he was so angry about they are not, they don't do this and they don't do that, and I thought he was gonna have a stroke. Soon everybody else in the group just got up and left and went back to watching the football game, and he kept going and going. When I got in the car on the way home that night, I said to my wife, I said, that attitude is the same attitude that ISIS has. It's hateful, condemnatory, name-calling, I said, it just made me so uncomfortable. She said, it made all of us uncomfortable. And so what a difference between, my brother-in-law's story on the plane on Wednesday and somebody who's so right that everybody else has to be put down. So we have this, as I mentioned, the story of the Good Samaritan there. The universe was created with a design law that we will all get along and live better with love, trust, and solid ties among all of God's creation. And that's called the circle of life. But we have another operating system that totally destroys all that. And in Romans 1:25, Paul writes and says, they exchange the truth about God for a lie, and they worship and serve what God has created instead of the Creator himself. And what is the correct one? We need to know that God is a God of love, and that he exemplifies all these traits and principles that he wants us to demonstrate too in caring for each other. And then we have the story that Jesus told about when the Son of Man comes as a king and all the angels with him, he'll sit on his royal throne, and the people of all the nations will be gathered before him, and he'll divide them into two groups, just as the shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. Put righteous people on the right, others on the left. The king will come in and say to the right, come, you that are blessed of my Father, come and possess the kingdom which has been prepared for you ever since the creation of the world. I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. I was a stranger, you received me in your home. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. And the righteous will then answer him and say, when, Lord, did we ever see you hungry or feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we ever see you a stranger and welcome you into our homes, or naked and clothe you? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will reply, I tell you, whenever you did this for one of the least important of the followers of mine, you did it for me. Amen. And at Christmas time, we had a story that we shared this year about a man who had a dream that on Christmas Day, God was going to come to visit him. So he prepared his house and he prepared everything. He was ready for God's visit. And he waited and waited all day. And there was a knock on the door, and he got all excited. And it was an old widowed lady who was a beggar, and she was cold and sort of groaned a bit. He invited her in, gave her something to eat, let her warm up, sent her on her way. And then he was waiting for God to come. The next he heard another knock at the door, and it was a child who was lost. So he took the child in and helped the child get it reconnected with family. He waited. Third, there was an old man who came in, and he was hungry and cold too, and so he fed him. He was so disappointed to think that God hadn't come. And that night he had another dream. He said, God, why didn't you come? God said, I was there. I was there 3 times. 3 times. You gave me something to eat. You warmed me up. You helped me find my way. I was there 3 times. Wow, powerful story. So, Jesus says, if one of you wants to be great, he must be the servant of the rest. If one of you wants to be first, he must be your slave, like the Son of Man, who did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life to redeem many people. So, I think Scripture points to this same principle of the amygdala, where fear is located, fighting for control. We've got to balance out that prefrontal cortex. We need to be people who exemplify these characteristics of love and service for others in all that we do. And so I wish you all a very good evening.